Lady Victoria Ashworth had always lived in the shadow of the crown. As the second wife of King Edmund's younger brother, she understood her place in the rigid hierarchy of the Kingdom of Eldoria. But understanding and accepting were two very different things. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Ashworth Manor as Victoria sat in her private study, fingers drumming against the mahogany desk. The letter before her bore the royal seal, and its contents made her blood boil. Princess Isabella, the heir apparent's 8-year-old daughter, would be attending the prestigious Royal Academy next autumn. The same academy that Victoria's own daughter, Lady Margaret, had been denied entry to 3 years prior. Victoria's jaw tightened as she remembered the humiliation. The academy's headmaster had cited insufficient royal lineage as the reason for Margaret's rejection, though everyone knew the real reason. Victoria was not born into nobility. She had married into it, and that would forever mark her as an outsider in the eyes of the royal establishment. The sound of heels clicking against marble announced the arrival of her personal secretary, Mrs. Holloway. The woman entered with her usual practiced efficiency, carrying a silver tray with morning tea and a stack of correspondence. "Your ladyship," the morning reports, Mrs. Holloway said, setting down the tray with precise movements. Victoria barely acknowledged her, still staring at the letter about Princess Isabella's acceptance. "Tell me, Mrs. Holloway, what do you know about the Royal Academy's admission process?" The secretary paused, sensing the dangerous undertone in her mistress's voice. "Only what is common knowledge, my lady. The institution has served the royal family for over 2 centuries. And their security measures?" Mrs. Holloway's eyebrows rose slightly. "I believe they employ the finest protection available, given the sensitive nature of their students." Victoria finally looked up, her green eyes cold and calculating. "Research everything about Princess Isabella's daily routine once she begins at the academy. Her classes, her tutors, her recreation periods, everything." "May I ask why, your ladyship?" "Because, Mrs. Holloway, it's time the royal family learned that actions have consequences. They have overlooked and dismissed us for the last time." The secretary shifted uncomfortably. She had served Lady Victoria for 5 years and recognized the signs when her mistress was planning something ambitious. "Shall I also inquire about the security protocols?" A slow smile spread across Victoria's face, but it held no warmth. "Yes, and pay particular attention to any weaknesses in their system. Use our contacts at court discreetly. I don't want anyone suspecting our interest." As Mrs. Holloway departed to carry out her instructions, Victoria rose from her desk and walked to the window overlooking the manor's extensive gardens. In the distance, she could see her daughter Margaret playing with her governess. The girl was bright, talented, and deserved every opportunity that birth and circumstance could provide. But the royal family's prejudice had closed doors that should have been opened to her. Victoria's mind began working through the possibilities. The Royal Academy was more than just a school. It was a symbol of everything she had been denied access to. If she could strike at its heart, she would send a message that echoed through every corridor of power in the kingdom. Over the following weeks, information trickled in through carefully cultivated sources. Victoria learned about Princess Isabella's love of horseback riding, her fondness for strawberry tarts, and her habit of reading in the Academy's ancient library during lunch periods. More importantly, she discovered that the young princess often wandered the school grounds with minimal supervision, a practice that would have horrified her parents if they had known. The plan began to take shape in Victoria's mind like pieces of an intricate puzzle. She would need allies, resources, and perfect timing. Most importantly, she would need to ensure that when the time came to act, she would be far from suspicion. Victoria contacted her old friend from finishing school, Lady Catherine Morley, who now ran an exclusive private hospital in the capital. Catherine owed Victoria several favors from their younger days, debts that Victoria was finally ready to collect. She also reached out to Dr. Marcus Blackwood, a brilliant but disgraced physician who had been expelled from the Royal Medical College for his unconventional methods. "I need something that will incapacitate someone temporarily without causing permanent harm," Victoria explained during a clandestine meeting with Dr. Blackwood in a dimly lit tavern outside the capital. "Something that could be easily administered and would cause symptoms that might be mistaken for a sudden illness." Dr. Blackwood leaned back in his chair, studying Victoria with curious eyes. Such substances exist, though their use would be highly illegal. May I ask what purpose this serves? Let's say I need to remove someone from a particular environment for their own protection, Victoria replied smoothly. Someone young and vulnerable who doesn't understand the danger they're in. The doctor nodded slowly. I can provide what you need, but I want no part in its administration. And I'll require payment in advance. Victoria slid a leather pouch across the table. Consider this a down payment. There will be more once the task is complete. As autumn approached and Princess Isabella's first day at the Royal Academy drew near, Victoria's network of conspirators grew. She recruited a groundskeeper at the academy who was bitter about his low wages, a kitchen maid who harbored Republican sentiments, and even a junior guard who had gambling debts that Victoria quietly paid off. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. During Princess Isabella's third week at the academy, when routines had been established and vigilance had naturally relaxed, the kitchen maid would slip Dr. Blackwood's concoction into the young princess's afternoon tea. The substance would cause symptoms resembling severe food poisoning, necessitating immediate medical attention. Lady Catherine's private hospital would receive an anonymous tip about a critically ill patient requiring emergency care, and her ambulance would happen to be in the area when the academy called for medical assistance. In the confusion and concern for the princess's health, she would be transported not to the Royal Medical Facility, but to Catherine's hospital. Once there, Princess Isabella would be kept in a medically induced state, while Victoria made her demands known to the royal family. She didn't want money or political power. She wanted recognition, respect, and a guarantee that her daughter Margaret would have access to every opportunity that royal birth traditionally provided. The beauty of the plan lay in its apparent concern for the princess's welfare. Victoria would present herself not as a kidnapper, but as someone who had saved the young girl from a mysterious illness that the academy's medical staff had been unable to properly diagnose or treat. As the final preparations were made, Victoria felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that she hadn't experienced since her wedding day. This was her chance to change not just her family's future, but the entire social structure that had kept people like her in permanent second-class status. On the night before the plan was set in motion, Victoria stood in Margaret's bedroom, watching her daughter sleep. The girl was innocent of her mother's schemes, but she would ultimately benefit from them. Victoria gently brushed a strand of hair from Margaret's forehead and whispered, "Tomorrow, everything changes, my darling. Tomorrow, we take our rightful place." The next morning dawned crisp and clear, perfect weather for what Victoria had privately dubbed the Great Equalization. As she prepared for what she expected would be the most important day of her life, Victoria had no idea that her carefully laid plans contained a fatal flaw that would ultimately lead to her downfall. The plan unfolded with clockwork precision during the first few hours. Princess Isabella arrived at the Royal Academy that morning in her usual cheerful spirits, unaware that she was walking into a carefully orchestrated trap. Victoria watched from her manners study, as reports filtered in from her various conspirators throughout the day. At precisely 2:30 in the afternoon, kitchen maid Sarah Jenkins slipped the doctored substance into Princess Isabella's afternoon tea service. The young princess consumed the tea along with her customary strawberry tart while reviewing her Latin exercises in the library. Within 20 minutes, she began experiencing severe stomach cramps and nausea. The academy's medical staff immediately sprang into action, but just as Victoria had predicted, they were baffled by the sudden onset and severity of the symptoms. When Princess Isabella's condition rapidly deteriorated, the head physician made the decision to call for emergency medical transport. Lady Catherine's ambulance arrived within minutes, staffed by carefully selected personnel who were loyal to Catherine and unaware of the true nature of their mission. To any observer, it appeared to be a routine medical emergency, handled with appropriate urgency and professionalism. Victoria received confirmation of the princess's arrival at Catherine's private hospital by 4 o'clock. Phase 1 was complete. Now came the delicate task of making contact with the royal family without immediately revealing her involvement. She waited until evening before placing an anonymous call to the palace. Using a voice modulator that Dr. Blackwood had provided, she spoke directly to King Edmund's private secretary. I have information about Princess Isabella's whereabouts and condition, Victoria said, her electronically altered voice echoing through the phone line. She is safe and receiving excellent medical care, but her situation is complicated. The secretary's voice was tense with barely controlled panic. Who is this? Where is the princess? Someone who has the royal family's best interests at heart, Victoria replied smoothly. The princess became ill at the academy due to what I discovered was a deliberate poisoning attempt by Republican extremists. I intervened to save her life. This lie was crucial to Victoria's strategy. By positioning herself as the princess's savior, rather than her captor, she hoped to avoid the most serious criminal charges, while still maintaining leverage over the royal family. I have taken her to a secure medical facility, where she can receive proper care while remaining hidden from those who wish her harm, Victoria continued. However, I require certain assurances from the Crown before I can safely return her. Detatic 2. Reads all. What kind of assurances? The secretary asked, though Victoria could hear him frantically signaling to someone else in the background, probably to begin tracing the call. Nothing that threatens the monarchy or the kingdom's stability, Victoria assured him. I simply want justice for the systemic discrimination that has plagued this realm for too long. Specifically, I want a royal decree guaranteeing equal educational and social opportunities for all members of noble families, regardless of their bloodlines. Purity. The secretary was quiet for several moments before responding. I'll need to discuss this with His Majesty. How do we contact you? You don't. I'll call again tomorrow at the same time. And before you consider involving law enforcement, remember that Princess Isabella's life depends on my continued goodwill. Any attempt to track or capture me will result in her immediate disappearance to a location far beyond your reach. Victoria ended the call and immediately destroyed the communication device. She felt a surge of satisfaction as she imagined the chaos and confusion now gripping the palace. For the first time in her life, she held real power over the royal establishment. Meanwhile, at Lady Catherine's hospital, Princess Isabella remained sedated, but stable. Catherine had been told that the girl was suffering from a rare genetic condition that required specialized treatment and absolute secrecy to prevent panic among the nobility. She accepted this explanation without question, trusting her old friend's judgment. Dr. Blackwood monitored the princess's condition hourly, ensuring that the sedation remained at precisely the right level. Too little, and she might wake up and realize her situation. Too much, and there could be dangerous medical complications that would turn Victoria's careful plan into a genuine tragedy. The next morning brought unexpected developments that Victoria hadn't anticipated. News of Princess Isabella's disappearance had somehow leaked to the press. Despite the palace's attempts to maintain secrecy, the kingdom's newspapers ran sensational headlines about the missing royal child, sparking widespread public concern and outrage. More troubling for Victoria was the speed and efficiency with which the royal security forces mobilized. She had expected a more measured response, giving her time to negotiate from a position of strength. Instead, roadblocks appeared throughout the kingdom within hours, and every medical facility was being systematically searched. Victoria realized that her anonymous phone call had been traced more successfully than she had hoped. While they didn't know her identity yet, the authorities had narrowed the search to a specific geographic area that included Lady Catherine's hospital. Panic began to set in as Victoria watched news reports showing security forces moving closer to her location. She called an emergency meeting with her co-conspirators, gathering them at a safe house outside the capital that she had prepared for just such a contingency. The situation has become more complicated than anticipated, Victoria announced to the assembled group. We need to accelerate our timeline and prepare for the possibility of discovery. Dr. Blackwood looked visibly shaken. I never agreed to participate in anything that would bring down the full weight of royal justice upon us. If we're caught, we'll face charges of treason, kidnapping, and assault on a member of the royal family. No one is going to be caught, Victoria said firmly, though she could feel doubt creeping into her own mind. We simply need to adapt our strategy. Lady Catherine stood abruptly, her face pale with realization. Victoria, what exactly have you involved me in? You told me this was about protecting a child from political extremists. The room fell silent as Catherine's words hung in the air. Victoria realized that her network of conspirators was beginning to unravel, as the true scope of their situation became clear. I involved you in saving a young girl's life, Victoria said, attempting to maintain her composure. Everything I told you was true. There are people who wish Princess Isabella harm, and we provided her with protection and medical care when the Academy's facilities proved inadequate. But her words rang hollow, even to herself. The other conspirators exchanged worried glances, and Victoria could see doubt and fear replacing their earlier confidence. The situation deteriorated further when the groundskeeper, Thomas Wright, suddenly stood up and backed toward the door. I'm done with this madness, he declared. I never signed up for kidnapping royalty. You can keep your money, Lady Victoria, but I'm turning myself in before this gets any worse. Before anyone could stop him, Wright bolted from the room. Victoria knew that within hours, he would be in custody and providing authorities with detailed information about the entire conspiracy. We need to end this now, Dr. Blackwood said urgently. Return the princess immediately and hope for mercy. But Victoria's mind was racing in a different direction. If she was going to face criminal charges anyway, she might as well ensure that her sacrifice achieved something meaningful. She had come too far to simply surrender without accomplishing her goals. No, she said quietly. We're going to see this through to the end. But we need to move the princess to a more secure location immediately. The room erupted in protests and arguments as Victoria's remaining conspirators realized that their leader had no intention of backing down. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles could be heard in the distance, growing steadily closer. The sound of approaching vehicles shattered the tense atmosphere in the safe house. Victoria's carefully constructed plan was collapsing around her, but her determination had hardened into something resembling desperation. While her conspirators argued and panicked, she was already formulating an escape route that would keep Princess Isabella under her control. Listen to me carefully, Victoria commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. Dr. Blackwood, prepare a portable sedation kit immediately. Catherine, you're going to help me transfer the princess to the secondary location we discussed. What secondary location? Catherine demanded. Victoria, you're not thinking clearly. The authorities are minutes away from finding us. Victoria pulled out a small device and pressed a button. The sound of a helicopter could be heard approaching from the north. I've been planning for this contingency since the beginning. There's a private aircraft waiting at an airfield, 20 miles from here. Dr. Blackwood stared at her in horror. You're talking about fleeing the country with a member of the royal family. That's not just kidnapping anymore. Victoria, that's international incident territory. Then you'd better decide quickly whether you're with me or against me, Victoria replied coldly. Because in approximately 3 minutes, royal security forces are going to storm through that door, and anyone found here will be arrested as an accomplice to treason. The helicopter landed in the field behind the safe house with military precision. Victoria had hired the pilot months earlier, telling him he would be needed for a confidential medical evacuation. The man knew nothing about the true nature of his mission, believing he was helping transport a critically ill patient to specialized treatment abroad. Lady Catherine found herself torn between loyalty to her old friend and horror at what Victoria had become. This is madness, Victoria. Even if you succeed in leaving the country, you'll be an international fugitive for the rest of your life. And what about Margaret? What happens to your daughter when her mother becomes the most wanted person in the kingdom? For a moment, Victoria's resolve wavered. She hadn't fully considered how her actions would affect Margaret's future, but the sound of vehicles pulling up to the front of the house eliminated any time for further contemplation. Margaret will understand when she's older, Victoria said, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. She'll know that everything I did was to create a better world for her. Dr. Blackwood had prepared the portable sedation equipment, but his hands shook as he handled the medical supplies. I can't do this, Victoria. I won't be responsible for whatever happens to that child. Then you're free to stay here and explain your involvement to the authorities, Victoria replied harshly. She grabbed the medical kit and headed toward the back door where the helicopter waited. What Victoria didn't know was that Thomas Wright had provided the authorities with far more information than she had anticipated. Not only had he revealed the location of the safe house, but he had also disclosed details about Lady Catherine's hospital and the helicopter contingency plan. Royal security forces were already positioning themselves at the airfield where Victoria's escape plane waited. More critically, Wright had revealed the identity of the pilot and the aircraft's registration number. As Victoria carried the unconscious Princess Isabella toward the waiting helicopter, radio communications were crackling with orders to intercept and disable the aircraft before it could leave Kingdom airspace. The helicopter lifted off just as royal security forces breached the safe house. Victoria watched through the aircraft's window as her former conspirators were taken into custody. Lady Catherine was led away in restraints, her medical career and reputation destroyed. Dr. Blackwood shouted something inaudible as he was forced into a security vehicle. During the 20-minute flight to the airfield, Victoria found herself alone with Princess Isabella and the hired pilot. The young girl remained unconscious, breathing steadily but showing no signs of waking. For the first time since the plan began, Victoria was forced to confront the reality of what she had done. Princess Isabella was not merely a symbol of royal privilege or a pawn in Victoria's quest for justice. She was an 8-year-old child who had been torn from her family and placed in mortal danger by Victoria's ambitions. The weight of this realization settled on Victoria's shoulders like a physical burden. When the helicopter approached the private airfield, Victoria could see that something was wrong. There were far too many vehicles surrounding her escape aircraft, and none of them appeared to be civilian. Her pilot, Captain Reynolds, noticed the unusual activity as well. "Lady Victoria, there appears to be some kind of security situation at the airfield," Reynolds reported through the helicopter's intercom. "I'm going to circle around and try to find an alternative landing site." But it was too late. Military aircraft appeared on both sides of the helicopter, their pilots communicating directly with Reynolds through emergency frequencies. The message was simple and non-negotiable: land immediately at the designated coordinates or be forced down. Victoria realized that her escape plan had been compromised from the beginning. The authorities had simply allowed her to play out her hand, gathering evidence and ensuring that Princess Isabella's location was confirmed before closing the trap. As the helicopter descended toward the surrounded airfield, Victoria made a decision that surprised even herself. She carefully checked Princess Isabella's vital signs and then activated an emergency beacon that Dr. Blackwood had included with the medical equipment. The signal would alert nearby medical facilities that a patient required immediate attention. "Captain Reynolds," Victoria said calmly, "as soon as we land, you're going to tell the authorities that I coerced you into this flight under false pretenses. You believed you were participating in a legitimate medical evacuation." The pilot looked confused. "Lady Victoria, what about your own situation?" "My situation is already determined," Victoria replied with surprising serenity. "But there's no reason for you to suffer for my choices." When the helicopter touched down, Victoria was surrounded within seconds by armed security personnel. She offered no resistance as they approached, instead focusing her attention on ensuring that Princess Isabella received immediate medical care. "The child has been sedated with a harmless but controlled substance," Victoria announced clearly to the assembled officers. "She requires monitoring but is in no immediate danger. Dr. Blackwood can provide specific details about the medication used." As medics carefully transferred Princess Isabella to a waiting ambulance, Victoria caught a glimpse of King Edmund himself arriving at the airfield. The monarch's face was a mask of controlled fury, but Victoria could see relief in his eyes as he watched his granddaughter being taken to safety. The trial of Lady Victoria Ashworth became the most closely followed legal proceeding in the kingdom's recent history. The prosecution painted her as a dangerous extremist who had endangered the life of an innocent child in pursuit of her twisted ideological goals. The defense argued that Victoria had been driven to desperate measures by systemic discrimination and had ultimately ensured Princess Isabella's safety throughout the ordeal. The evidence against Victoria was overwhelming. Her own conspirators, desperate to reduce their sentences, provided detailed testimony about every aspect of the plan. Thomas Wright received a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation, while Lady Catherine and Dr. Blackwood faced substantial prison terms for their roles in the conspiracy. What surprised many observers was Victoria's demeanor during the trial. She showed no remorse for her actions, but neither did she display the defiant arrogance that many had expected. Instead, she appeared almost resigned to her fate, as if the trial were merely a formality in a drama whose conclusion had already been determined. When called to testify in her own defense, Victoria delivered a speech that would be quoted and analyzed for years to come. "I do not ask for mercy or forgiveness," she told the packed courtroom. "I accept full responsibility for my actions and their consequences, but I want the record to show that everything I did was motivated by love for my daughter and a desire to create a more just society for future generations." Victoria paused, looking directly at King Edmund, who was present for her testimony. Princess Isabella was never in true danger, because her welfare was always my primary concern. If I had wanted to harm the royal family, there were far simpler and more direct methods available to me. Instead, I chose a path that I believed would force a necessary conversation about equality and justice in our kingdom. The judge, Lord Justice Pemberton, was unmoved by Victoria's explanation. In his sentencing remarks, he described her crimes as an unprecedented attack on the foundations of our constitutional monarchy and a betrayal of every principle that holds civilized society together. Victoria was sentenced to 100 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The harsh sentence was intended to send a clear message that attacks on the royal family, regardless of their motivation, would be met with the full force of the law. As Victoria was led away to begin her sentence, she thought not of her own fate, but of her daughter Margaret. The girl had been placed in the care of distant relatives and would grow up knowing that her mother had become one of the most notorious criminals in the kingdom's history. In the years that followed, Victoria's case became a subject of academic study and political debate. Some viewed her as a misguided extremist, whose actions had set back the cause of social justice by decades. Others saw her as a tragic figure whose desperate methods had been driven by legitimate grievances against an unjust system. Princess Isabella recovered completely from her ordeal and eventually became one of the most popular members of the royal family. Interestingly, as an adult, she became a vocal advocate for educational reform and social equality, though she never publicly commented on whether Victoria's actions had influenced her later positions. Margaret Ashworth legally changed her name when she reached adulthood and eventually became a successful human rights lawyer. She never visited her mother in prison, but she did establish a foundation dedicated to reforming the kingdom's educational system to ensure equal opportunities for all children, regardless of their family background. Victoria spent her remaining years in solitary confinement, reading extensively and writing detailed memoirs that would never be published. Prison records indicated that she never expressed regret for her actions, maintaining until her death that she had been fighting for a noble cause, even if her methods had been questionable. The case of Lady Victoria Ashworth remained one of the most controversial criminal cases in the kingdom's legal history, raising questions about justice, equality, and the lengths to which people will go when they believe the system has failed them. Her story served as both a cautionary tale about the dangers of extremism and a reminder that even the most carefully planned conspiracies ultimately face the consequences of their choices.